It began, as most great undoings do, with something deceptively small, a phrase tossed out like a crumpled receipt, meant to dismiss, to diminish, to put me firmly back in the box they'd so carefully constructed for me over the years. But boxes, no matter how sturdy their cardboard or how tightly sealed their flaps, eventually weaken with constant wear, with the silent pressure of all that they contain. I was the contents of that box, a lifetime of quiet service, of unacknowledged sacrifice, of love poured out without measure, now finally ready to burst through. For so long my days had been a carefully orchestrated ballet of others' needs, a choreography of small kindnesses and large labors that over time had blurred into an invisible extension of my very being. There was Arthur, my son-in-law, with his booming laugh and his perpetually rumpled suits, always with a new opportunity that demanded Clara's, my daughter's, full attention, often leaving their children, Lily and Sam, in my care. And Clara, bless her heart, perpetually breathless from chasing Arthur's ambitious dreams, often too exhausted to notice the quiet erosion of my own life. I'd helped them with the down payment on their sprawling sun-drenched house, money I'd saved meticulously for my late husband's pension, believing it would be an investment in their future, and by extension in my connection to them. I'd cared for Lily since she was a fussy infant, her tiny fingers curling around mine, a bond that grew stronger with every scraped knee and whispered secret. Sam, the boisterous whirlwind, became my shadow, his incessant questions a balm to my often silent home. My own house, once vibrant with the echoes of my own children, now felt like a lonely outpost, a place I returned to only to recharge for the next deployment to their bustling, demanding world. I didn't mind, not truly, not at first. The joy of the grandchildren was a potent elixir, a warmth that filled the hollow spaces left by my husband's passing, and to be needed, truly needed, felt like a purpose I hadn't realized I craved. So I answered every call, every frantic text. Mom, can you pick up Lily from school? Arthur's got a last-minute flight. Grandma, Sam has a fever. We can't miss this meeting. Can you stay the night? Eleanor, darling, the garden party is next weekend. Could you help with the catering? You're so good with details. The requests grew, subtly at first, then brazenly. Weekends bled into weekdays, evenings into overnights. My own appointments, my nascent hobbies, my burgeoning friendships, all were quietly shelved, deferred to the urgent demands of their chaotic, important lives. I cooked their meals, cleaned their spills, managed their overflowing laundry, ferried children to endless activities, tutored them through difficult homework, even nursed them through bouts of flu while Arthur and Clara jetted off to conferences or closed deals. I was more than a grandmother. I was a live-in chef, a chauffeur, a personal assistant, a cleaner, a nurse, a therapist, and most importantly, the unwavering anchor in their turbulent sea. And through it all, there was a tacit understanding, a silent agreement, that this was just family. This was what grandmothers did. This was love. Or so I told myself, every time a flicker of resentment threatened to ignite. Arthur in particular had a way of making me feel both indispensable and utterly invisible. He'd pat my shoulder with a genial smile, thank me profusely for holding down the fort, then immediately turn his attention to his phone, already mentally moving on to the next deal, the next conquest. Clara, caught in his orbit, would offer a fleeting, tired smile, a whispered "Thanks, Mom, you're a lifesaver," before she too was swept away by the current of their ambitious lives. They spoke of their immense success, of their rising status, of the grand plans for their future, often over dinners I had prepared, in a house I had often cleaned, while their children, whom I had cared for all day, slept soundly upstairs. It was a gilded cage. This life of theirs, and I, it seemed, was merely one of the unseen gears that kept its elaborate mechanism turning. The quiet strength I possessed, a resilience forged over decades of small challenges and larger heartbreaks, was now being tested in a new, insidious way. It wasn't a battle, not with an obvious enemy, but a slow, almost imperceptible draining, leaving me feeling hollowed out, a ghost in my own life, always present but never truly seen. The quiet hum of their expensive dishwasher, the scent of their gourmet coffee brewing each morning, the distant laughter of the children playing in the sun-drenched yard. These were the sounds and smells of their thriving world. A world I helped build, yet stood apart from an uncredited architect in a house that was not my own. And sometimes in the dead of night, after a particularly draining day, a cold dread would creep in, a tiny, insidious question. What if I vanished? Would they even notice? Or would they simply find another gear, another invisible hand, to keep their grand machine spinning? The answer, I feared, was clearer than the morning sun. The comment itself, when it came, was not a sudden explosion, but a casual flick of a match into a pool of long simmering oil. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, the kind of day where the air was thick with the promise of rain and the children trapped indoors were particularly boisterous. Sam had decided to use the expensive Persian rug as a canvas for his crayon masterpieces, and Lily, in a fit of sibling rivalry, had emptied a box of cereal onto the freshly polished kitchen floor. Arthur, having returned unexpectedly early from a very important meeting, walked into this tableau, his face a mask of weary exasperation. He'd found me on my hands and knees, scrubbing at the crayon marks with a mixture of vinegar and desperation, while simultaneously trying to calm a wailing Sam and a defiant Lily. He didn't offer to help, of course. He merely sighed, ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, and surveyed the chaos with the air of a man unjustly burdened. "Eleanor," he began, his voice a low, paternalistic rumble, as if addressing a particularly slow employee. "You know, this is precisely why we pay good money for professional childcare. This kind of mess, it's just not something you should have to deal with." He then walked over to the kitchen island, picked up his phone and started scrolling. Lily, sensing the shift in the adult atmosphere, pointed a sticky finger at me and piped up, "Grandma's just babysitting us." Arthur chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that grated on my ears. "Exactly, sweetie. She's just a babysitter. Aren't you, Eleanor?" He didn't even look up from his phone, the words delivered with the casual indifference of someone stating an obvious, inconsequential fact. Just a babysitter. The words hung in the air, heavy and noxious, mingling with the faint smell of vinegar and spilled cereal. It wasn't the first time he'd implied my efforts were merely a stopgap, a convenience, but never before had it been so blunt, so utterly devoid of respect, especially not in front of the children I adored. The children who were now looking at me with innocent, curious eyes, repeating the new label, babysitter. My hands, still grimy from the crayon wax, froze on the rug. A strange, cold calm settled over me, a stillness that was utterly unlike the usual turmoil of my inner world. For months, years even, I had been telling myself that my contributions were valued, that my family appreciated me, that this relentless giving was simply the fabric of our lives. But Arthur's words, amplified by Lily's innocent echo, sliced through that carefully constructed illusion like a surgeon's scalpel. Just a babysitter, not a mother, not a grandmother, not a pillar of support, not a tireless caregiver, not a meticulous housekeeper, not a financial backer, not a confidant, just a babysitter. A temporary paid convenience, easily replaced, easily dismissed. The implication was clear. My time, my energy, my love, none of it held any inherent value beyond the most basic, transactional exchange. The kind of exchange one makes with someone who punches a clock and then disappears. A wave of betrayal washed over me, cold and sharp, not just from Arthur but from Clara too, for her passive acceptance of this dynamic, for allowing me to be reduced to this, and the shame too, a hot flush that started deep within and spread quickly. Shame for having allowed myself to be so thoroughly exploited, for having clung to the illusion of being cherished. I felt the familiar sting of tears welling behind my eyes, but something snapped before they could fall, a quiet, furious resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every woman who had ever been told her emotional labor, her invisible work, her selfless devotion, was worthless. This was about reclaiming a dignity that had been slowly, imperceptibly chipped away. I rose from the rug, slowly, deliberately. My knees ached, My back protested, but my spirit, once bowed, now felt a strange new kind of steel. I looked at Arthur, who was still absorbed in his phone, oblivious to the seismic shift he had just triggered. "Yes, Arthur," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, almost serene. "That's exactly right. I am just a babysitter." He grunted in acknowledgement. Not even looking up, he had no idea what he had unleashed. The immediate aftermath was a blur of contained fury. I finished cleaning the crayon, calmed the children, and retreated to the guest bedroom, the one that had been designated Grandma's room, but felt more like a temporary holding cell. The words echoed in my mind, just a babysitter, each syllable a fresh wound. I sat on the edge of the bed, the embroidered pillow sham cold beneath my hands, and stared at the framed photo of Lily and Sam on the bedside table. Their smiles, so innocent, so full of the unconditional love I'd given them, felt like a cruel mockery in that moment. How could I have allowed this? How could I have been so blind, so eager to be needed, that I failed to see the slow erosion of my own worth? My husband, bless his memory, had always told me I was too soft, too giving. "Eleanor, people will take advantage of you if you let them," he'd warned, his voice heavy with concern. I dismissed it as his gruff protectiveness. Now his words returned with the chilling clarity of prophecy. I thought of all the times Arthur and Clara had gone away, leaving me for days, sometimes weeks. With the children, the time Lily had chickenpox, and I slept on the floor beside her bed, sponging her feverish forehead, while her parents were on a cruise in the Caribbean. The time Sam had an emergency appendectomy, and I was the one signing consent forms, waiting in the sterile hospital corridor, while Arthur was pitching investors in New York and Clara was too distraught to fly back immediately. The countless school plays, parent-teacher conferences, doctor's appointments, birthday parties, all attended by me, the invisible proxy parent. My own life had become a series of cancellations, postponements, and apologies to friends who eventually stopped inviting me, understanding implicitly that I was no longer truly available. My small retirement savings, meant for travel, for a comfortable future, had been steadily depleted by their endless requests for loans that were never repaid, by the investments in Arthur's latest ventures that invariably fizzled. It wasn't just the physical labor, the endless tasks. It was the emotional weight, the constant anxiety for their well-being, the absorption of their children's joys and sorrows as if they were my own. It was the sleepless nights worrying about Sam's nightmares, the patient hours spent helping Lily with her dyslexia, the quiet understanding I offered when they were struggling with their parents' frequent absences. That was a burden they never had to carry, shielded by my willingness to take it on. And for all of it, for every drop of my essence poured into their lives, I was just a babysitter. A cold, hard kernel of an idea began to form in the quiet despair of that room. If I was just a babysitter, then I should be treated like one. And babysitters, good ones, don't work for free. They charge, they calculate, they demand fair compensation for their time, their skills, their invaluable presence. The sheer audacity of the thought almost made me laugh. A hollow, humorless sound. Me, Eleanor Vance, a woman who had always prided herself on her generosity, her selflessness, suddenly contemplating a ledger of my services, a cold, hard invoice for the love I'd freely given. But the more I thought about it, the more logical it became. It wasn't about the money, and not truly. It was about principle. It was about quantifying the unquantifiable, about making visible the invisible. It was about holding a mirror up to their faces and forcing them to see the true cost of their comfortable neglect. I got up, my movements slow but purposeful, and went to the desk in the corner. I pulled out a fresh notebook and a pen. My hand, which had trembled with hurt moments before, now felt steady, imbued with a strange new resolve. I started with the broad categories: childcare, household management, transportation, meal preparation, personal assistance, emotional support. Then I began to break them down, meticulously recalling the hours, the days, the weeks, The time Lily had chickenpox, 14 consecutive days of round-the-clock care, Sam's appendectomy, 72 hours in the hospital, the regular school pickups and drop-offs, twice a day, 5 days a week for 6 years, the weekly grocery shopping, the meal planning, the cooking, at least 3 meals a day, when I was staying with them, which was often, the gardening, the pet care, the organizing of their chaotic lives. Each entry was a quiet accusation, a testament to a life spent in service, utterly uncompensated. My mind, usually prone to dwelling on regrets, became a sharp, efficient calculator. The pain of the past was being transmuted into cold, hard data. And as the numbers began to accumulate, a different kind of emotion surged through me, a quiet, burning indignation that solidified into a chilling determination. They thought I was just a babysitter? Very well. I would charge them like the most expensive, highly qualified, on-call, all-inclusive, utterly indispensable babysitter they had ever seen. The irony of it was almost delicious. The days that followed were a quiet storm, contained entirely within the 4 walls of my small, neat house. I immersed myself in the calculation, the methodical obsession that shielded me from the raw sting of betrayal. My old address book became a resource, a network of contacts I hadn't thought to use in years. I started with simple research. What was the average rate for a babysitter in this affluent suburb? What about a nanny, a live-in housekeeper, a personal assistant? The numbers, when I started seeing them, were staggering. For basic babysitting alone, I was looking at rates ranging from $25 to $40 an hour, depending on the number of children and time of day. For a nanny, the figures jumped to $3,000 a day, $5,000 a month, not including overtime or benefits. A personal assistant could command $30 to $75 an hour. And a household manager, someone who oversaw the entire domestic operation, easily upwards of $60,000 to $100,000 a year. I wasn't just a single service, I was a multifaceted enterprise, a one-woman domestic army. The notebook filled quickly, page after page, columns of dates, hours, tasks performed, and the corresponding market rate. I even accounted for emergency response fees, the last-minute calls, the middle-of-the-night trips to the ER, the times I dropped everything to be there. I consulted my old friend Martha, a retired HR manager who'd always had a keen eye for fairness and a no-nonsense approach to compensation. I described my situation vaguely, framed it as a hypothetical for a friend who was being taken advantage of. Martha, always sharp, didn't quite buy the hypothetical, but her advice was invaluable. Eleanor, tell your friend to document everything, every single hour, every task, and she needs to apply a fair market rate. And don't forget the opportunity cost. What she gave up to provide these services. Opportunity cost? That hit hard. The canceled art classes, the postponed trips with friends, the missed social events, the quiet moments I'd forfeited simply to be perpetually on call. Those were harder to quantify. But I included a line item for on-call availability at a reduced hourly rate, a subtle nod to the constant mental burden. I unearthed old calendars, sifted through text messages and emails, cross-referencing appointments and travel plans. The evidence mounted, undeniable and overwhelming. There was the spreadsheet detailing the time I spent managing their home renovation, sourcing contractors, overseeing deliveries, ensuring deadlines were met, a job that, if outsourced, would have cost them a substantial fee. The hours spent chauffeuring Lily and Sam to their myriad after-school activities, often a 2-hour round trip in rush-hour traffic. The endless cooking, not just quick meals, but elaborate Sunday dinners, holiday feasts, healthy packed lunches, all tailored to their specific dietary preferences. I even factored in the emotional labor, the patient listening to Clara's anxieties about Arthur's demanding schedule, the mediating of sibling squabbles, the comforting of heartbroken children. This was the most difficult to assign a monetary value, but I decided it was embedded in the childcare and personal assistance rates. A good caregiver wasn't just a presence, but a source of stability and comfort. The numbers, once abstract, began to coalesce into a staggering sum. My hands, which had once cradled infants, now meticulously tabulated 6 years of unpaid, selfless work. Each figure I wrote down was a silent scream, a testament to my worth, a defiant rebuttal to Arthur's casual dismissal. The initial pain of betrayal had hardened into a cold, calculated resolve. This wasn't about vindictiveness. Not entirely. It was about justice. It was about self-respect. It was about drawing a clear, undeniable line in the sand. I imagined their faces when I presented it. Arthur's initial bluster, Clara's inevitable tears, their shock and outrage. They would call it absurd, preposterous, a betrayal of family, and I would meet it with the quiet, unyielding strength that had always been inside me, though rarely given cause to shine. My heart pounded with a nervous energy that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I was stepping into a new version of myself, one who was no longer content to be taken for granted. The transformation was complete. The grieving, undervalued woman was being replaced by someone with a clear purpose, a woman ready to demand what was rightfully hers, not just in money, but in acknowledgement and respect. The spreadsheet became my shield, my weapon, and my testament. And as I penned the final formidable total, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I was ready. The day I decided to present the invoice felt heavy with portent, a silent prelude to a storm I knew would break. I chose a Sunday, their usual family dinner day at their house. It was a ritual I'd maintained for years, arriving early to help Clara with preparations, only to find most of the work already waiting for me. This time, I arrived at my usual hour, but my heart was a drum in my chest, a counter rhythm to the gentle hum of their expensive appliances. I carried a large, unassuming manila envelope, its contents a culmination of months of meticulous calculation and a lifetime of unspoken grievances. Inside, my carefully prepared spreadsheet, divided into categories, each month a separate entry, each task assigned a market value hourly rate. Every single hour of the past 6 years accounted for. The grand total was typed boldly at the bottom, a sum so astronomical it almost made me dizzy to look at it. As I helped Clara set the table, my movements were precise, almost mechanical. Lily and Sam, sensing my unusual quietness, circled me with curious eyes. "Grandma, are you okay?" Lily asked, her small hand reaching for mine. I squeezed it gently. "I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart," I reassured her, a faint tremor in my voice I hoped she didn't notice. Arthur arrived home shortly after, his usual boisterous self brimming with anecdotes from his golf game. He greeted me with a quick hug, a familiar gesture that felt like a phantom limb, no longer truly connected to anything real. "Eleanor, you're a lifesaver, as always," he declared, sniffing at the aroma of the roasted chicken I had just pulled from the oven. "Couldn't do it without you." His words, once a soothing balm, now tasted like ash. After dinner, as we sat around the large, polished dining table, the last remnants of dessert consumed, the children safely tucked into bed upstairs, I knew the moment had come. The light from the chandelier above cast long, dancing shadows on the wall, adding a dramatic edge to the impending confrontation. Clara was scrolling through her phone, tired but content. Arthur was leaning back in his chair, patting his stomach, a picture of domestic bliss. "There's something I need to discuss with you both," I began, my voice steady, though my palms were slick with sweat. They both looked up, a flicker of mild annoyance on their faces at being interrupted from their post-dinner relaxation. "It's about the arrangement we've had these past few years." Arthur waved a dismissive hand. "Eleanor, darling, it's family. There's no arrangement. We just appreciate all your help." He flashed his easy, charming smile, the one that had disarmed me for so long. "Precisely," I said, my voice gaining a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. "And I appreciate your appreciation. However, after your comment the other day, Arthur, about me being just a babysitter, it got me thinking." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching for a reaction. Arthur's smile faltered slightly, replaced by a vague uneasiness. Clara's eyes, usually so quick to well with tears, were wide with dawning comprehension. I reached for the manila envelope beside my chair and slowly, deliberately pulled out the neatly printed spreadsheet. I slid it across the table towards Arthur. It landed with a soft yet impactful thud. I decided to quantify just a babysitter, Arthur, and a few other roles I seem to have filled for you over the past 6 years. I think you'll find the figures illuminating. Arthur picked up the sheet, his brow furrowed in confusion, then amusement, as he glanced at the title I'd given it, Eleanor Vance, Comprehensive Domestic Services and Child Care Provision, an itemized statement. He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. What is this, Eleanor? Some kind of joke? Clara, however, leaned closer, her eyes scanning the columns. As she read, her face drained of color, her casual amusement replaced by disbelief, then a dawning horror. Her gaze flicked from the page to me, then back again. Arthur, still chuckling, began to read aloud, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Childcare, August 2017 to present, 400 and 500 hours at 30. Household management, 2,000 hours at $45 total, 90,000. Personal assistance, 1,500 hours at $50 total, 75,000. Emergency on-call services, 500 hours at $60 total, 30,000. Care, 이fer, ois kanye, 이유타래, 학회, 이quas, 간드로, 오색, 비, 이키하, it, orders, eight, pife, puke. That is you. Getty bob you. Itzera pedres, su hek, etc. Opus, ihre. UNF, wakadu, isio, boskill. Tibunti, blue shishro, D-sit-wa, oil totfa, lokara. Tag had you are. Paditry, tayo. Uisansame. Prize hayona.
Ayat right.
30,000. His voice trailed off, his laughter gone, replaced by a gaping silence. He finally reached the grand total at the bottom of the page. 4072, 350? He whispered, his voice incredulous, almost choked. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, his face a mask of shock and outrage. Eleanor, are you out of your mind? What in God's name is this? This is This is blackmail. Clara, who had been silently tracing the numbers with a trembling finger, finally found her voice. Mom, how could you? This is family. This is insulting. Her voice was high-pitched, indignant, the very picture of wounded betrayal. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. They were insulted. After all these years of my quiet, unpaid labor, they felt insulted by a bill. No, Arthur, I said, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. This is not blackmail. This is an invoice for services rendered. You called me just a babysitter. I merely applied the market rate for the work I've been doing, and not just babysitting. As you can see, I've included an accounting for the household management, the personal assistance, the nursing, the chauffeuring, the emotional support, everything you've outsourced to me free of charge for the better part of 6 years. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping, becoming more intense. When Lily had chickenpox for 2 weeks, and you were on a cruise, who was there, sponging her fever, changing her sheets, calming her cries? When Sam needed emergency surgery, who was signing the consent forms, waiting by his bedside while you were closing deals in New York? When your house flooded last year, who managed the contractors, dealt with the insurance, cleaned up the mess? When you needed thousands for Arthur's failed venture, who handed it over without question? Me. Always me. Arthur, regaining some of his bluster, slammed his hand on the table, rattling the empty dessert plates. This is absurd. We provided you with a home, with food, with a place in our family. This is pure greed, Eleanor. After everything we've done for you. Done for me? I echoed, a faint, bitter smile touching my lips. You allowed me to be your unpaid domestic staff. You treated my time, my energy, my very life as an inexhaustible resource. You took without asking. and certainly without acknowledging. And you paid me in vague appreciation and the casual dismissal of my worth. Clara, tears, now finally welling in her eyes, appealed to my long-held sense of maternal guilt. Mom, please, think about the children. What will this do to our family? This isn't you. You're better than this. Am I? I retorted, my voice sharp. What exactly am I, Clara? Am I the endless well of free labor? The convenient grandmother who never says no? The one you can always count on to clean up your messes, literal and figurative, without a single complaint? Is that better? My gaze flickered between them, seeing their shocked faces, the dawning realization of the depth of my resentment. They were seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time in years, and they didn't like what they saw. Arthur stood up, pacing the room, his movements agitated. This is a gross miscalculation, Eleanor. A ridiculous overestimation. No one pays these kinds of rates for what you do. This is an insult to our generosity. It is a market rate, Arthur. I corrected him calmly. Researched thoroughly, and my services were comprehensive, on call, and provided with a level of dedication that no paid staff would offer. You also have to consider the opportunity cost, the life I deferred, the experiences I missed, the personal time I sacrificed to be at your beck and call. He stopped pacing and turned to me, his voice low and threatening. You can't be serious. You actually expect us to pay this? We'll never pay this. We'll simply find proper help, and you'll have alienated your own daughter and your grandchildren. The threat hung in the air, chilling and real. The thought of losing Lily and Sam, of severing that precious connection, was a physical pain in my chest. But then I remembered their innocent faces, repeating Arthur's words, "Grandma's just babysitting us," and a fresh wave of resolve washed over me. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was about defining my own worth, on my own terms. Perhaps you will, I said, meeting his gaze squarely. Or perhaps you will finally understand the true cost of your expectations. This isn't just about money, Arthur. It's about respect. And if the only way to get it is to put a price tag on my love and labor, then so be it. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rapid beat of my own heart. I had delivered my truth. The ball was now in their court. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that life for all of us would never be the same. The immediate fallout was precisely as I had predicted. And yet, somehow worse. The air in the house became thick with unspoken accusations, with the bitter tang of resentment. Arthur predictably launched into a furious tirade, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of their sprawling home. He called me ungrateful, manipulative, greedy. He accused me of trying to extort money from my own family, of betraying their trust. He even invoked my late husband, claiming he would be ashamed of my actions. Each word was a fresh arrow, but I stood my ground, my quiet strength acting as a shield against his verbal assault. Clara, my own daughter, was a different kind of pain. She didn't yell as much as she wept, her tears a weapon designed to chip away at my resolve. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "Don't you love us anymore? What about Lily and Sam? Are you just going to abandon them?" The thought of abandoning my grandchildren, of severing that precious bond, twisted my gut. But her words were also an indictment, a painful reminder of how easily they conflated my love with my unpaid labor. "My love for them has nothing to do with this, Clara," I said, my voice hoarse from the strain. "But my love for myself, my dignity, my right to be seen and respected, that has everything to do with it. You two created this dynamic, not me. And when I finally tried to put a value on it, you accused me of betrayal." She couldn't understand, or wouldn't. She was too deeply entangled in Arthur's worldview, in the comfortable illusion that her mother's endless generosity was simply the natural order of things. The next few days were a blur of increasingly desperate phone calls. Arthur threatened legal action, claiming harassment and extortion. I countered, calmly, with the legal advice I'd vaguely sought. I've merely presented an invoice for services rendered, I stated, repeating the phrase I'd rehearsed so many times. There's no legal precedent for you to claim harassment over a bill, particularly when the services were clearly performed and accepted. I had even gone so far as to briefly consult a family law attorney, anonymously, simply to understand my standing. The lawyer, a kind but pragmatic woman, had confirmed that while my invoice was unlikely to hold up as a legally enforceable contract, it did serve as powerful documentation of a long-standing pattern of reliance and quid pro quo, which could complicate any counterclaims they might attempt. The attorney's advice was simple. You're trying to assert your value. They'll try to shame you into submission. Hold your ground. I did. The unspoken conflict of years. The resentment I had silently carried was now violently, loudly spoken. Their words intended to shame me only solidified my resolve. They didn't see me as a person with needs, with a life, with dignity. They saw me as a resource, and that resource had just dried up. The conflict began to ripple outwards. Arthur, in his indignation, complained to his business associates, painting me as a senile, greedy old woman. Clara, seeking sympathy, confided in a few mutual friends, twisting the narrative to portray me as a heartless monster. But some of those friends, women who had perhaps endured similar dynamics with their own families, looked at Clara with a strange mixture of pity and discomfort. Mrs. Henderson, my next-door neighbor for 30 years, a woman of sharp wit and keen observation, stopped me on my porch one morning. "Eleanor," she said, her voice low, "I heard Arthur's version of events, but I've also seen you, day in and day out, for years. I know what you've done for that family. He should consider himself lucky. You didn't charge him for every single gray hair you got on his account." Her words were a balm, a quiet validation that transcended the financial figure. It wasn't just me. Others saw it too. The silence from Clara, though, was the hardest. After a particularly nasty phone call where she screamed about me ruining everything, she stopped calling. Days turned into a week, then 2. The usual stream of texts, the casual demands for help, dried up completely. My phone, once constantly buzzing with their requests, was eerily, painfully silent. It was a silence filled with the echoes of their accusations and the hollow ache of a relationship irrevocably fractured. I missed Lily and Sam dreadfully. Their laughter, their stories, their sticky embraces. But I knew this was the price. The price of finally saying no. The price of valuing myself. It was a dark, lonely period, but beneath the pain, a strange sense of empowerment began to bloom. I had forced them to see me, not as an extension of their needs, but as an independent entity, with my own worth, my own boundaries. It was a devastating but necessary battle, and I knew, deep down, that I had chosen the right side. The silence from Arthur and Clara stretched into a third week, punctuated only by my aching desire to see Lily and Sam. I tried calling Clara once, leaving a hesitant message about missing the children, but she didn't return the call. The grandchildren, I assumed, were being kept away from me, casualties in their parents' war against my perceived greed. This isolation was a torment, far more effective than any shouting or legal threat. It preyed on my deepest fear, that my stand for self-respect would cost me the very people I had sacrificed so much for. Then the phone rang. It was Arthur. My heart leaped, then clenched. His voice, for once, lacked its usual bravado. It was clipped, cold, devoid of its usual charm. "Eleanor," he began, without preamble, "Clara and I have discussed your Theo proposal. We find it outlandish, of course, ridiculous, but we are willing to negotiate." My breath caught. Negotiation. It wasn't an outright dismissal, a complete severing. It was a concession. "Negotiate what, Arthur?" I asked, keeping my voice level, betraying none of the hope that was fluttering inside me. "The sum, obviously," he scoffed, some of his old arrogance returning. "We are not paying you $500,000. That's absurd. The sum is merely the market value of the services provided. I countered, recalling Martha's advice. It represents the financial burden you've avoided by utilizing my unpaid labor. If you had hired professionals for even a fraction of those services, you would have paid more over the years. He sighed, a dramatic exhalation. Look, Eleanor, we're willing to offer a settlement, a lump sum, a gesture of goodwill, but it won't be anywhere near your inflated figure. And we want this situation to be resolved quietly. No more talk of invoices, no more family drama. The bitterness of it was palpable, not an acknowledgement of my worth, but a desire to make the problem go away, to sweep their complicity under the rug. And what about the children, Arthur? I asked, my voice softer, allowing a hint of the underlying pain to show. Will I be allowed to see them? There was a long pause, filled with the static hum of the phone line. Clara is upset, he said finally, his voice betraying a hint of strain. She feels betrayed, but we understand you're their grandmother. Access can be arranged. On our terms, of course. Supervised visits initially. Supervised visits. As if I were a threat, a danger. The inversion of the power dynamic was complete. They were now dictating terms, not because they valued me, but because I had forced their hand. It was a bittersweet victory. I wouldn't get the full amount. I knew that. But the mere fact that they were offering anything, the fact that they were even having this conversation, was a testament to the fact that I had made them see, I had made them confront the true cost of their privilege. I'm willing to consider a reasonable settlement, I said, but I expect clear terms regarding my access to Lily and Sam. And I expect an acknowledgement, however small, of the years I've given you, Arthur. An apology, perhaps, for the way I was dismissed. Another long silence. An apology? He scoffed. Eleanor, you're the one who threatened to bankrupt us. No, Arthur, I corrected him calmly. I merely showed you what you owe. There's a difference. And if you want this to be truly resolved, if you want to maintain any semblance of a relationship, then a little humility would go a long way. The conversation ended without an apology, but with a promise of a specific figure, a significant, though reduced sum. It was still a huge amount, enough to secure my financial future, to reclaim some of the opportunities I'd forgone. And the children, I held on to that hope. The battle was far from over, but the tides had turned. I had forced their hand, and in doing so, I had begun to reclaim my own. The negotiation was protracted, a dance between their lingering indignation and my unwavering resolve. Arthur and Clara offered a figure that was still laughably low compared to my detailed invoice, but significantly more than the zero I had been paid for years. I countered, calmly but firmly, pointing to specific line items they had clearly undervalued or ignored. The legal counsel I had briefly consulted, though not directly involved, had advised me on the psychological aspects of negotiation. Hold your ground, don't waver, let them feel like they're getting a win even as you dictate the terms. It wasn't about being vindictive. It was about being pragmatic. After days of terse phone calls and email exchanges, a final sum was agreed upon. It was less than half of my original invoice, but it was still a substantial amount, enough to buy me a comfortable financial independence I hadn't dared to dream of since my husband passed. More importantly, it was an acknowledgement, a tacit admission that they had, indeed, been taking advantage of me, that my labor had value, that their assumption of my endless availability came with a price. They framed it as a gift, a family gesture, a pre-inheritance to avoid the awkwardness of calling it what it was, compensation. But I knew the truth. It was a payment for services rendered. The money itself, when it finally arrived in my bank account, a week later, felt strangely sterile. It wasn't the sum that brought me peace, but the principle behind it. It was a tangible validation of my worth, a silent roar against years of quiet erosion. The relationship with Clara, however, remained strained, a brittle thing, easily shattered. She still couldn't look me in the eye without a flash of hurt or resentment. I just can't believe you did this, Mom, she'd said during one of our first post-settlement conversations, her voice tight with suppressed anger. It feels like you put a price on our family. No, Clara, I'd replied, my voice gentle, but firm. I put a price on my own labor. Your family benefited from it for free for too long. That's the difference. There was no grand reconciliation, no tearful apologies. It was a quiet, almost cold peace. The biggest relief, the one that truly soothed the raw edges of my heart, was the slow re-establishment of my relationship with Lily and Sam. Arthur and Clara, having paid their debt, reluctantly allowed me to see them more regularly, though initially it was always in their presence, a reminder of the new boundaries. Lily, ever perceptive, seemed to sense the shift, clinging to me a little tighter, her eyes searching mine as if for answers. Sam, oblivious in his youthful exuberance, simply enveloped me in his usual boisterous hugs. Slowly, the tension eased. Clara, perhaps realizing that cutting me out entirely would hurt her children more than it hurt me, began to relax her guard. The supervised visits faded into the familiar rhythm of my being part of their lives again, albeit on my terms this time. I would still visit. I would still care for my grandchildren, but I now had boundaries, clear lines drawn in the sand. I would only stay when I chose to, only for the hours I was willing to give. And when I left, I would return to my own house, my own life, reclaiming the time and energy that had been siphoned away for so long. The inversion of the power dynamic was complete. I was no longer the endlessly available resource. I was a person, a grandmother, who chose to give rather than being expected to. The house, their grand, sun-drenched symbol of success, no longer felt like a place of silent servitude, but a place I visited on my own terms. The money allowed me to pursue passions I'd long deferred. I enrolled in the art classes I'd canceled for years. I booked a trip, a long-dreamed-of journey to Italy, a place my husband and I had always planned to visit. I started volunteering at the local animal shelter, finding a quiet companionship in the soft purrs of abandoned cats and the eager licks of playful puppies. My own house, once a lonely outpost, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where I was truly myself, free from the demands of others. The irony was not lost on me. By putting a price on my labor, I had not only gained financial independence, but also a profound sense of personal freedom. I had charged them like a babysitter, and in doing so, I had bought back my life. The last conversation I had with Arthur about it, months later, was surprisingly subdued. He called me, not to ask for a favor, but to tell me about a new business venture. It was a fleeting, almost casual chat, but just before he hung up, he paused. "You know, Eleanor," he said, his voice hesitant, uncharacteristically devoid of his usual bluster. Clara and I, we found a nanny, a wonderful woman. Costs a fortune, of course, and she only works specific hours. And we still have to manage the house and the kids' schedules. It's a lot." He didn't apologize, not directly. He didn't say, "You were right," but in his words, I heard it. The quiet acknowledgement of the immense, undervalued labor I had provided. The true cost of what they had taken for granted. "Yes, Arthur," I replied, a gentle smile touching my lips. "I imagine it is." There was a pause, a beat of unspoken understanding between us. And then he just said, "Well, thanks again, Eleanor, for everything." It wasn't the dramatic apology I might have once craved, but it was enough. It was an admission in its own way that my worth was undeniable. Now that they were footing the bill, my life now hums with a different rhythm. It's a slower, more deliberate pace, filled with choices I make for myself. I still see Lily and Sam regularly, and our time together is richer, more cherished, precisely because it is no longer obligatory. I am their grandmother, yes, but also Eleanor, a woman with her own pursuits, her own schedule, her own life. The bittersweet truth is that some relationships are irrevocably changed by the assertion of boundaries. Clara and I may never return to the easy intimacy we once shared, burdened as it is by the echoes of past resentments and the lingering discomfort of her own complicity. But what I lost in unchallenged family dynamics, I gained in self-respect and newfound freedom. The house, my home, stands as a quiet monument to this transformation. It's not grand or sprawling like theirs, but every corner holds a piece of my reclaimed autonomy. The art on the walls painted by my own hand, the books I finally have time to read, the garden I tend with a quiet satisfaction. These are the fruits of my stand. I look at my hands now, no longer scrubbing crayon from carpets or sorting someone else's laundry, but holding a paintbrush, a travel guide, or a grandchild's hand by choice. The lines etched on them are not just from age, but from years of labor, seen and unseen, and now, finally, acknowledged. The memory of Arthur's casual dismissal, just a babysitter, still surfaces sometimes, but it no longer stings. Instead, it serves as a powerful reminder, a bitter but redemptive catalyst that forced me to see my own worth, to value what I had given so freely, and to demand the respect I was always due. It was a dark time, but it led me to a quiet kind of liberation. I am Eleanor Vance, and I am no longer just a babysitter. I am a woman who knows her worth and has the invoice to prove it. And that in itself is a priceless victory.